Well, in Donald Trump's perverse and disrespectful world to the rule of law, a social media post counts as due process. Yes, that was an argument that was raised today before Judge Gia Cobb by the Department of Justice in their attempts to fulfill Donald Trump's wish to get rid of Lisa Cook and gain control of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. A social media mean tweet about purported mortgage fraud and her lack of quote-unquote response is due process. Eyebrows went up. They belonged to Judge Cobb, but she gave as good as she got, and she was a hot bench for both sides of this case. I expect a ruling on Tuesday about whether Lisa Cook's going to be able to keep her job or not, at least temporarily, on the Board of Governors. And the bigger picture, can Donald Trump gain control of the Federal Reserve and therefore what interest rates are being charged to try to wallpaper over his failing economy? I'm Michael Popak. I'm not failing. You're not failing. You're here on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF. Let's talk about the hearing that happened with a ruling expected just after Labor Day. Lisa Cook, PhD, multiple degrees in economics, has been on the Federal Reserve for a year. 12-year term, expires 2038. You normally wouldn't have to know anything about Lisa Cook, except Donald Trump figured out after a Biden appointee, Ms. Kugler, decided she was going to leave the Federal Reserve, that would give Donald Trump the ability to get control of the 7-member Board of Governors. The Federal Reserve, our central bank, led by Jay Powell, who was appointed as the chairperson by Donald Trump. They have a blunt force instrument to help manage the economy, jobs and inflation and jobs. And that is called the rate of interest, the interest rate that's charged interbank and then as used to set rates for mortgages, consumer loans, credit cards, and the rest. And there's been a fight brewing with Donald Trump for the entirety of his term because he needs low interest rates in order to make up for a failing set of economic policies, including his tariff policies. And the American consumer is being hurt. He's trying to blame Jay Powell. He wants the Federal Reserve and its 12-member open market committee, of which Lisa Cook is one part, to lower the rates. 5 months in a row. They haven't. Next rates meeting is September 18th. Donald Trump is putting maximum impact, blunt force trauma on the Federal Reserve. And as soon as Ms. Kugler resigned, Donald Trump figured out, if I get one more seat, I'm in charge. And because he hadn't been in charge before in his first term, he only had two of the seats when he even started, 2 out of the 7. Now he picked up a third with Kugler's resignation. And if he can pick up Lisa Cook's seat, he's in the lead 4-3. Why does that matter? For many reasons. The Board of Governors then appoints the presidents of the regional banks that make up the Federal Reserve. You add all them together, you get a 12-member Federal Open Markets Committee who sets interest rates. Donald Trump would be able to set interest rates, right? You're on the MeidasTouch Network. Have I mentioned that? I'm Michael Popak. We're doing a lot of weekend analysis here for the long weekend, and I didn't want to miss my mark. So, right on cue, Bill Pulte takes a look, I guess, at all this private mortgage data and tries to make an argument from his perch as being the head of the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, which are mortgage, not regulators, mortgage liquidity entities that help mortgage money go out into the market. He's also a big Trumper, big donor to Trump, and this was his gift to become the head of Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. From there, he's been posting social media posts, which is the argument that was raised in court today by Donald Trump's lawyers, that a social media post accusing Lisa Cook of mortgage fraud was due process. And even that led Judge Gia Cobb, to say, that's the due process? But she's troubled by aspects of Lisa Cook's argument as well. Get to that in a minute. So Bill Pulte, right on cue, goes after a number of Democratic icons and leaders and a lot of black women leaders. Letitia James, New York Attorney General, for mortgage fraud allegations, Adam Schiff, Senator, and Lisa Cook claims that she owned 2 properties, maybe 3 properties, checked the wrong boxes as to whether these were her primary residence, her secondary residence, her vacation home, her rental property, whatever it is. If this is the level of wrongdoing, I mean, where is the long list of Republicans that have checked the wrong box on their mortgages or their taxes? I implore you, I implore you, Mr. Pulte, where is your investigative skills when it comes to the Republicans? But be that as it may, he started posting on social media. I'll show you a few of them. You know, she's a crook. She's a crook. Here's her signature on 2 loans. She's a crook. You know, and filing a letter with the Department of Justice as a whistleblower complaint. Their argument in court today, after she sued to keep her job after Donald Trump fired her, their argument was she got due process, Judge. Social media posts. She was put on notice that she was accused of mortgage fraud, and she never really responded. So we fired her. The judge was like, Mr. Roth, Yakov Roth, you're not suggesting that this is appropriate due process, are you, under any Fifth Amendment standard? And he said, yes. So that is already a loss. You know, I've argued in front of a lot of judges. If you got a losing argument, you have to concede the weakness of your argument, or you lost all credibility. He should have said, that's not our best argument, Your Honor. However, then make some other argument. So they got a due process argument. Now, I did point out, as we round into the hearing here, that the judge took under advisement and expects a ruling on Tuesday. But, you know, I can read some of the tea leaves here. While due process was a very strong argument for Lisa Cook to at least temporarily keep her job, the issue of for cause and the meaning of what a for cause termination, that's really at the heart of this. I've been doing employment law for a long time. For cause is a way to distinguish somebody being fired without doing anything wrong. You know, layoffs, you know, just things that don't rise to the level of a crime, misconduct, malfeasance. That's a regular old firing, not for cause. And for cause means you've done something really wrong, and usually that's defined in a contract. And if it's not defined in the contract, it's defined in case law. I've litigated dozens of cases in the company that I worked for in which we fought over what was cause and not for cause, because somebody's payout may be greater. If they get fired without cause, they get a big check. If they get fired for cause, they don't get that big check. So there's always a fight over the money. In the area of Federal Reserve governors, we have some recent case law. In May of this past May, in the Wilcox case, the Supreme Court came out and said, when it comes to the Federal Reserve, you can't just fire them on your own like you can, Trump, every other board or agency. That's why we lost the head of the National Labor Relations Board, the Merit Systems Protection Board, the Special Counsel's Office. Every head, we just lost the Surface Transportation Board head and the rest. But they said that the Fed was different and that the Fed can only be fired by the president, having been created by Congress under the separation of powers, if there's a for cause reason. But they left open what does for cause mean. They got right to the end, and then they took a break. They took a lunch break. But there are other cases going back to 1935 in a case called Humphrey's Executor that bring this forward and talk about malfeasance, misconduct, what's called inefficiency, which is a version of a theft of honest service. You're getting paid to do your job, but you're not doing your job. And that these are the things that have to be proven by substantiated findings, which is usually interpreted to mean somebody sitting in a big chair, like an arbitrator or a judge or a jury making the findings. Doesn't have to be criminal, it's short of criminal, but it has to be determined by someone. And this is the rub that's going on right now. Trump's position, and the judge spent a lot of time going over this with both lawyers, Abby Lowell for Lisa Cook and Yakov Roth for the government, about who gets to say what's for cause. Trump's argument obviously is I do. And he says it's a capacious definition of for cause. I get to whatever it is that I say it is, which is what he argues about. I get to declare what's an insurrection, a rebellion, a predatory incursion, and the rest. But the argument on the other side is, no, that's not what Congress nor the case law intended, nor the Supreme Court in May. Because if we just let Trump say, just accuse somebody and fire them, how is that any different than him just firing somebody? In other words, there'd be no difference between for cause and no cause if you adopt Trump's definition. Why are we here, in other words? If he can just fire somebody and say, well, you have to have a reason. Okay, here's my reason. Okay, that's fine. That seems to be inconsistent with what the Supreme Court is saying when they try to put a ring fence around the Federal Reserve and protect it from an out-of-control president just firing people without cause. So this is going to get back to the United States Supreme Court about what is for cause when it comes to the Federal Reserve and under the Federal Reserve Act. Who determines it? How much deference is given to the president? And you know, this MAGA Supreme Court 6-3 bends over backwards to give as much power and authority to the presidency, at least the one occupied by Trump, as possible. But you see where this is going. And that's what's troubling Judge Cobb. Now, she's no shrinking violet. She's taken on the Trump administration. She's ruled against them this term. She's blocked certain of their decisions in the immigration field. She's super smart, but she's struggling. Do I defer completely to the president when he says what it is? She wasn't completely buying the argument raised by Cook. This isn't great for Cook. That it was she's just being fired under a pretext. It's not about her. It's about Donald Trump trying to gain control of the Federal Reserve. But she didn't love the argument on the other side either. That was raised by the lawyers for Donald Trump, which was, that he gets to do whatever he wants. And she is troubled by his efforts to try to take over the independence of the Federal Reserve. So that's where the rubber is meeting the road. If I were guessing, and I could be wrong, and if I am, I'll come back and tell you I was wrong. But if I was reading what I watched and what I heard, the judge is going to be very troubled, Judge Cobb, on the due process issue. And she's going to find that Lisa Cook was not given proper due process, that she's going to hold an evidentiary hearing to allow Lisa Cook to defend herself on for cause, that she's going to find that at the end of the day, the way she interprets the case law, that the Supreme Court wants her to make findings substantiated by evidence about the cause. Yeah? Mortgage fraud may be a cause. And, everybody's a little bit, even on this side of the aisle, everybody's a little bit troubled that she hasn't been able to articulate a defense for herself. Like, I didn't do it. It wasn't me, or I checked the wrong box, but by accident, and I paid back the money, or I told the bank and they re-rated me. They gave me a new interest rate. You don't see a lot of that. You see a lot of clerical error, and not a crime. Yeah, I got it. I think the judge picked up on that early. And if she didn't pick up on it, Trump's lawyers were busy reminding her she's not even denying it. But there needs to be a process for her to do that before she loses a coveted 12-year governor's seat. She may well lose it. But if she loses it, it's going to be after a hearing, after evidence, after she gets a lawyer like Abby Lowell able to put on his case, put on the evidence and then explain why whatever this is, the check boxes on a mortgage or intention to deceive the banks in order to get a lower interest rate, he's going to argue it's not sufficient to take her off the Federal Reserve. And they're going to argue it is. And that's going to be for the courts to decide. And whatever she decides, it's going to go to the D.C. Appellate Court. And whatever they decide, it's going to go to the United States Supreme Court. We're on a fast track to the United States Supreme Court here because she's going to rule Judge Cobb on Tuesday. Because she's worried about the September 18th meeting where they get back together and talk about rates, of which she's going to be a part. In the meantime, the Federal Reserve has said she's still a governor. We'll abide by whatever courts say, but she is still a governor. And right now, she doesn't have to do much. I'm not saying the Federal Reserve people, governors, don't do anything in between them. They only work 2 days a month. But the big meeting is on the 18th. But I think we'll get a ruling. And if whoever doesn't like that ruling is going to run to the next court and then up to the Supreme Court. I think because of the compressed timetable here. We're only, we're 20 days away from the meeting. We're going to go quickly to the Supreme Court. I think we're going to be at the Supreme Court even before the October term opens, the new term opens for the court on the first Monday in October. We'll continue to follow it here, Legal AF Substack. All right. And where I'm posting her motion is posted. Trump's opposition is posted. Everything's posted. I do live updates and reporting twice a day just to give you kind of a live immediacy of what we're doing over there. So I think you're really going to like the Legal AF Substack community as well. If you don't know anything about Substack, come over and check it out. In the meantime, I'm Michael Popak. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.